before I get into lesson 5, I really want to start off with the homework problem that I assigned you in the last class. For those of you who remember, the question was, what is the law of demand? And the answer to that, the way we derive that, I don't know if you remember, but we basically draw a simple demand and supply graph, right? Demand, as you remember, is downward sloping, correct? Supply, as you remember, is upward sloping, right? And here is price, and here is quantity, right? Now, the question was that what is the law of demand? And the law of demand basically states that as your quantity demanded, right, which is this right here, your quantity demanded, these shifts right here, decreases, okay? So this is decreasing, correct? In this direction. What happens to the price? Well, the price, as you can tell, if you go across here, is increasing. So the law of demand is basically simple. It says that as your quantity demanded goes down, your price goes up. And that's the answer to the homework problem. All right, without further ado, let me start with lesson 5. In lesson 5, we've covered the foundations of macro and microeconomics. And what this class is about is starting the microeconomics part. And the first part that we're going to go over is the basic law of demand and supply and how those work. The way we're going to start off with that is using the same graph that we've always used. That's the advantage of microeconomics, is that the graphs are always to do with the basic supply and demand. Of course, there are exceptions, and there are other graphs, but for now we're going to use the basic graph it's behind me here. The law of demand and supply, first we can talk about it by beginning about a competitive market. What is a competitive market, right? A competitive market is a market where you have all these firms, right? A firm is sort of like a company, okay? So if you imagine McDonald's, right, is a firm in economics, okay? What's a competitor to McDonald's? It's Burger King, right? So in a competitive market, the way we describe a competitive market is that there are no single firm, like a monopolist, that can control the price, right? The price is established in a competitive market. I'm going to repeat this one more time. In a competitive market, the price is not established by one particular firm. Rather, it's established by an equilibrium created by the demand and supply in the market. So let me use the graph to kind of explain how that works. And as I said before, it really is the basic same graph that I've drawn before. And just for recap's sake, I'm just going to draw this again. We're going to keep the axes intact. It's still going to be price and quantity. Again, as you guys remember, D is downward sloping, that's demand. Supply is upward sloping, right? Simple, we have to remember this. Now, if this is our current market, right? This is our market. I'm going to short market. Okay, I'll just write market for M-A-R-K-E-T. Okay? And this is your market. And in a competitive market, as I said before, there is no particular firm that's going to set the price. So what's going to happen is that if you look at the equilibrium, and the equilibrium, the way you dictate what, and you can tell what an equilibrium is you look at the way these places intersect, right? Where does the supply and the demand intersect? Right here. Okay, does everyone see that? Okay, supply and demand intersect at this point. And this point, as we've talked about this before, is the equilibrium point in economics. Very, very critical to know what the equilibrium is, okay? So if I tell you that this is the equilibrium point, right? And for example, I'm going to take an example with that McDonald's, thing that I was talking about. McDonald's and Burger King are pretty much there all over the world, but for people who don't have McDonald's or Burger King, it's basically a fast food place. Okay, so these are all fast food joints. So any place that you have food restaurants, okay? So if you look at this particular thing and you say that, okay, the average price of, let's look at the hamburger market, okay? So say the average price of hamburger is at $5, okay? So this is going to be your equilibrium point, okay? Your $5. And at this point, at this $5 point in the hamburger market, let's say that, I'm just making these examples, as I go along just to make sure it's easy for you guys. Okay, let's say that 200 hamburgers are being consumed at this equilibrium point. Okay? Now, for example, in a competitive market, let's say for some odd reason that the price is $8, okay? If the price right now is at $8, and I'm going to show you how this works, okay? It's $8 right there. The way this works is that because it's a competitive market, the market is going to, what it's going to do is that it's going to drive the shortage down or the surplus down. And what do I mean by all this? Okay, there's a lot of terms being drawn here, okay? So I'm going to do something very simple. I'm going to look at this demand graph, okay? And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to show you guys exactly what I mean by what is demanded and why is there a surplus, why is there a shortage. So I'm going to go this demand graph, right? As you guys see this line, I'm going over here, going down, and let's say this number is about 100, or let's say it's 150. Okay? That is 150. I'm just going to write a little bigger so you guys can see. That's 150, okay? And this right here, this number is 200. Okay? Now, I'm going to go over to the supply line and I'm going to show you guys what's the quantity supplied. Okay? And quantity supplied, let's say, is 250. Okay? 250. Again, to write it bigger is 250. Right? This 150 number is the amount, because it's because I've drawn it from the demand line, right? At $8 in this competitive market, the customers are only demanding about 150 burgers. So this is the quantity demanded, noted by QD. Okay, this is quantity demanded. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, now at $8 though, why is there a surplus? If you look at the supply line, right, just go along here and look at the supply. Down here I have 250 burgers. This is the amount that is supplied, quantity supplied. QS stands for quantity supplied, okay? So if you look at the difference, right, there's a surplus of 100. How do I get that 100? I go, what is the amount that's supplied, right? QS, okay, minus QD, okay, will give me the surplus or the shortage, right? Surplus, or shortage. Okay, so let's look at the quantity supplied. In this case, we have 250, right? 250. The quantity demanded, if you go over here, is 150. Right? So what's my answer? Okay, pretty simple. It's 100. Okay, so in this market at $8, there's 100 hamburgers that are in surplus. Now, why does this happen? It's pretty simple. At a price that is higher than the equilibrium price, right? $8 is bigger than $5. What's going to generally happen is that there's more number of hamburgers that the firm can supply, but the quantity demanded is low. Now, similarly, the opposite applies for a price that's lower than the equilibrium price. Again, guys, remember the equilibrium price for my example is $5. Okay. So say, for example, I'm going to give you an example where it's, let's say for some reason it's $3, okay? So go over here, it's $3, okay? Now, at $3, what's really interesting is that the quantity demanded, right? So you look at the demand, the way you get your quantity demand is look at the demand, right? And look at the price, okay? Go down here, and let's say this is $2.25, okay? And I'm going to try to pull it here. Okay, so this is $2.25, okay? I'm going to write it down here, $2.25. Right here, this point is $2.25, okay? Now, what's the quantity supplied? Okay, look at $3, right? Look at the supply line, and I go here, and it's $1.50, okay? Now, same way, same formula. I'm going to use the same formula again. Let's look at the quantity supplied. Quantity supplied is, I believe, quantity supplied, look at the supply line, look at the price, $3. Intersection is 150, right? 150. What's my quantity demanded? Well, look at my demand graph, look at the intersection of $3. I go down here and it's $2.25, right? And this number is negative, okay? Now, why is this negative number being created? Well, because there's a shortage, right? There's more that's being demanded than being supplied at this $3. Because if the hamburger is cheaper, obviously you guys will buy more hamburgers, right? If the hamburger is more expensive, you guys will buy less hamburgers. That is why the quantity demanded at $3 is higher than the quantity supplied, and at $8, the quantity demanded is lower than the quantity supplied, okay? Now, why am I going through all these examples is what I'm trying to drive home is that basically I want to let you guys know that if the price in a competitive market is higher than the equilibrium market, for example, $8 is bigger than 5, what's going to happen is there's going to be higher quantity supplied than quantity demanded. If the price is lower than the equilibrium price, such as $3, the quantity demanded is going to be greater than the quantity supplied. Okay, that's why we have a negative number here. Okay, so what is the basic statement out of this? The statement is that in the competitive market, it's an equilibrium, right, that's going to drive the price. So at $3, what's going to happen is you guys, the consumers, are going to bid against each other, and you're going to drive the price up to $5. Okay, so this price is going to go up from $3 to $5. If the price is at $8, the people that are selling, let's say McDonald's or Burger King, are selling these hamburgers, what they're gonna do is, because they have a surplus, they're gonna drive this price down, okay, to $5. Either way, the price is gonna come back in a competitive market. The price is gonna come back to the equilibrium point, right, at $5. Okay, does that make sense? So we're gonna come back to 5, and we're gonna have the equilibrium amount of 200. Okay, and that's in an equilibrium market. And this is the basic way how a competitive market works. And it's really important because in economics, we differentiate competitive versus imperfect markets. And in other markets, later on, I'll talk about monopolies and things like that. And those firms really can dictate their own prices. But in here, in a competitive market, you have to understand that it's all the firms that dictate the price. Not just one firm, it's all the firms that dictate the price. And the way this equilibrium works is what people will be selling at. Okay? I hope everyone has got that. Now, the way we explain that is that it's called trial and error, right? So we went to 8, we went to 5. Okay, another trial was 3, we went to 5. That's called trial and error. Okay, and that's the way this competitive market works. The kind of guidebooks that I've also looked at, discuss a particular thing called the 3 key issues in a competitive market, and I'll talk about all those, and they have these fancy names and things, but really it boils down to the fact that, do you understand that in a competitive market, firms it's not just one firm that dictates the price, it's all the firms, right? For that reason, in a competitive market, right? In a competitive market, right? The firms are called price takers. Firms are price takers, okay? And why are the firms price takers? What does this term mean, price takers? What that really means is that there's no one firm that dictates the price, but all the firms, right, together with the equilibrium created by the demand and supply, that dictates the price. And that's why these guys are forced to take the price that the equilibrium is at. And that's why the firms in a competitive market are called price takers. They are price takers, okay? So the 3 things that really in a competitive market that are important is that what we call the disciplinaries, right? And these are the terms that, it's not really necessary that you understand these particular terms, but these are what I have seen are being called. So it's really understand the basic point behind it, not necessarily the exact terms, right? So there's a term called disciplinaries, okay? 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 And then there's rationale. And then there's what we call signals, okay? Okay, so, and these are all to do with the competitive market, okay? Disciplinaries basically talks about the fact that, say an example, I gave you the example that maybe for some reason the price of a hamburger is $8, but equilibrium price is about $5, okay? So what disciplinaries really discusses is that, say it's at $8, the market is gonna force the prices to come down to the equilibrium price at 5. And that's what disciplinaries talks about. It's about how all the firms are forced to meet at the equilibrium price, okay? That's disciplinaries. The rationale is that, say for example, that the price is higher than the quantity that is in equilibrium, or the price that's in equilibrium. So in our example, the price in equilibrium was $5, and say for some reason that it's $8, it's higher than the equilibrium price. What the rationale talks about is that if the price is higher than the equilibrium price, the firms are going to be very, since they have abundant amount of, because they have shortage, they're going to be really careful in the way that they're going to give their resources out, okay? But for some reason, let's say the price is below the equilibrium price, what the firms are going to do is they're going to be really easy with the way that they're going to sell because they have more demand than what is supplied, okay? So remember the basic, okay, these three terms, if you don't know it, it's not a big deal. But understand a competitive market, if the price is higher than the equilibrium price, there's going to be a surplus of that good. If the price is lower than the equilibrium price, there's going to be a shortage of that good. Now, understand that in a competitive market, it always comes back to equilibrium, okay? Because competitive markets, firms are price takers. And this is the entire thinking behind a competitive market, okay? If you don't exactly know these three terms, that's okay. Understand the basic concept behind a competitive market, okay? With that being said, I'm gonna dig into more terms here. And the next terms I'm gonna discuss about are called absolute price and relative price, okay? So what are these terms? Absolute price, right? Absolute price. Absolute price. Okay, and the next term is going to call relative price, right? Relative price. Okay, so absolute price and relative price. What is the big difference between absolute price and relative price? Okay, in a competitive market, an absolute price is what the price is selling at. For example, I gave you guys an example. This is a hamburger market, okay? I don't know why I'm sticking to hamburgers for some reason, okay? But if you like another food, I'm sorry. We can always select another food next time. But for this reason, it's hamburgers day, okay? So we have price, we have quantity, right? And same thing, demand. You guys are experts by now. Supply, okay? And I'm sorry if this is a small graph. It's just going to be a quick example. I'm going to come back to this. But, you know, for some reason I said that the price is at $8, right? But my equilibrium is at, let's say, $5, okay? $5 is my equilibrium price, and $8 is what the price is at. The absolute price is the price that it's actually stated at, okay? Which is $8, okay? So absolute price in my example is $8. For some reason, let's say it's $2, well, it's $2, okay? So whatever the price is in that market, that's what that is, okay? It's the absolute price. But then there's this concept called relative pricing, and that's really important too. Relative price discusses that what is the price when we compare to the price that's being offered by other firms, okay, or the stated price at the beginning of the year, okay? So relative price is always comparing the rest of the firms. Absolute price is the top price, okay, the stated price, right? So let me just give you an example real quick. Let's say in our hamburgers, you guys have heard about McDonald's, you guys have heard about Burger King, okay? Let's say that all the you know, other firms are for some reason at $3 of equilibrium, okay? And for some reason, McDonald's is charging a little more. It's $3.25, okay? The absolute price is going to be $3.25, okay? But the relative price is going to be comparing the $3.25 to the $3, which is the price offered by the rest of the firms. And if you guys know competitive markets and you know the fact that firms are price takers, so if I tell you guys that I'm in a competitive market, what do you think is going to happen in that $3.25 burger? It's going to come down to $3, okay? So absolute price, relative price. Absolute is the stated price. Relative is the price that's when you compare it to the price offered by other firms, or the price that's being stated at the beginning of the year, right? Does that make sense? So relative compares other prices. Absolute is just that stated price. Okay, it might show up in a multiple choice question. Just to be careful, I've gone over that. Now, my next topic is going to talk about the difference between amount demanded and the demand itself. Okay, so before I jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about equilibrium. Okay. So equilibrium, and we're still talking a competitive market, guys, okay, just in case. Equilibrium. I hope everyone's with me. If these concepts are confusing, we're going to go over some problems later on so that it'll be a little more clear. Okay, so there's a couple things you guys need to know in a competitive equilibrium. In a competitive market equilibrium, right, the demand and supply, for the most part, don't change. Mostly don't change. Okay? Why is this? Because I told you guys that in a competitive market, there are price takers. The equilibrium is what sets everything, right? So for the most part, demand and supply don't change. Okay? Now, the way we dictate an equilibrium, okay? Equilibrium, right? I'm going to draw an arrow, okay? So equilibrium, short for EQ, I'm going to short it for EQ, okay? The way equilibrium works is that an equilibrium is present where the amount demanded is equal to the amount that's supplied. Okay? And the thing is, the beautiful part about this is that you guys already know about this. I'm just writing it down so it's more clear. Because as I've stated before in our graph that we've drawn so many times, and you guys will become experts of graphs after this, but when I have a PQ graph, right, y-axis is price, the x-axis is quantity, and I draw my demand graph, and demand is downward sloping, okay, and I have a quantity supply, I have supply, right, equilibrium. So where is the amount demanded? The amount demanded is the demand right here. Where does that equal amount supplied? Right here, okay? So where that meets, the demand meets the supply, that's where my equilibrium lies, okay? So that is why the way we denote it, okay, and remember, this is a very important part because it's going to help you guys out. The way you denote it is this is price and at equilibrium. The E stands for equilibrium, okay? So I say PE, right? So that's the price at equilibrium. And again, the way I figured out equilibrium is where the demand meets the supply, okay? And similarly, I'm going to do the same thing for quantity. Go down here, okay? And this is my quantity, standing by Q, E, which is quantity at equilibrium. So QE is the quantity at equilibrium, and PE is the price at equilibrium, okay? And the way I figured out equilibrium is the demand meets the supply. Amount demanded, right here, equals amount supplied, okay? And this is the basis of equilibrium and the way it works. In the future, when we have to draw graphs, you will have to show that at equilibrium it's PE, price is PE, and quantity equilibrium is QE, okay? So remember these two terms because you'll see it oftentimes that you have to draw this in graphs. So remember that, okay? In the long run, in a competitive market, the one other thing you have to know is that there is no shortage or surplus, okay? So know that there's no shortage or surplus in the long run, okay? Why does that happen? Why in the competitive market is there no shortage or supply in the long run? Because what's going to happen is that this equilibrium, where amount demanded, amount supplied, they're going to meet and they're going to take out the surplus or the shortage. For example, if the price was here, right, what do you think is going to happen? Is it a shortage or a supply? Well, for those of you who guessed it was was it a shortage or supply? Surplus, excuse me. For those of you who guessed it's surplus, they're right because the quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. So there's a surplus of the goods. At the price that's lower than the equilibrium price, there is a shortage of goods, okay? Because the amount demanded is greater than the amount supplied. Now, in the long run, the reason why there's no shortage or surplus is because this price, if it's lower than the equilibrium price, is going to go up, right? Because consumers are going to bid against each other and they're going to make it more expensive, right? If the price was higher and there's a surplus, the surplus is going to go away because the price is going to come down to the equilibrium price, okay? So this is the reason why in the long run there's no shortage or surplus, okay? And this is in the long run, okay? Remember that. So that being said, we've covered this particular section of equilibrium. And now I'm going to move on to what I've talked about before, which was the difference between amount demanded and the actual demand. It's really important not to mix up these two things, because as students, and I guarantee you this on the AP test, the test is going to see if you guys know the difference between amount demanded and demand, right? So I'm going to write that down, definitions for you guys, so that you guys know the clear differences between demand and amount demanded. Okay, so the first thing I talked about was, let's start with the amount demanded, okay? Let's start with the amount demanded. Okay? What is amount demanded? Okay? The amount demanded in my graph, and again, guys, you guys are gonna be experts, right? Because in this graph where I have demand and supply, right? The amount demanded is the quantity along the demand graph, right? So this is one amount demanded, okay? And I'm gonna say this is Q1, okay? This is the amount demanded. And the amount demanded is basically the amount that the consumers are willing to buy at that particular price point. And I can write it down for you guys if you want the definition. This is the quantity, right? Quantity of goods, or it could be services, okay? / services that the consumer is willing to buy. And the key here is to know that it's at that particular price point, right? And what do I mean by this? And I'll explain using the graph. Willing to buy at a price point. Oops. Price point. Okay? So this is a quantity, amount demanded is a quantity of goods and services that a consumer is willing to buy at a particular price point. What do I mean by this? If you look at the demand graph, okay? If you look at this, and you look at this particular point, right? And I said this is quantity 1, okay? This is the amount that they demand at this particular price point, right? Let's say this is called, let's call it P1, okay? So at P1, if you go along here, right, and you go to the demand, you hit the demand graph, what you do is you drop down, and this is the quantity, the Q1 is the quantity that these particular consumers are willing to buy, right? This is the amount demanded, right? Q1 is the amount demanded at price 1, okay? Now we're gonna do this for, say, another price. I'll go up here, okay? Just for fun, go up here. And I'm gonna call this price 2, okay? I'm gonna go along again, the same thing, go along here. Look, when I hit the demand, right? As soon as you hit the demand, you drop down, okay? Hit the demand, let's go down here. I apologize if it's not a straight line, it should be a straight line, okay? Now, this is gonna be Q2. Now, I'm gonna give you guys a couple seconds to think about what Q2 is. Okay, Q2 is basically the amount demanded, okay? The amount demanded at price point 2, okay? What does that mean? It's the amount that these consumers are willing to buy at this particular price point. And notice, guys, the higher the price, right, the less the amount demanded. Why? Because few people can afford when the price is really high, but a lot of people can afford something that's price is low, okay? If I charge water, okay, say water, I charge about $1 per bottle, okay, versus I charge $10,000 per bottle, how many people do you think are willing to buy it for $10,000, right? Not too many. But for $1, there are a lot of people who are willing to buy that water bottle, okay? Does that make sense? So the lower the price, the higher the amount demanded. And the way we say the amount demanded is these Q right here, right? Q1 is the amount demanded at price 1, Q2 is the demanded at price 2, okay? The amount demanded. Does that make sense? So I hope everybody has a grasp on what amount demanded is, because you really have to know the difference between amount demanded and demanded. In the next lesson, I'm going to go over demanded, and then I'm going to show the big differences. But understand that the only way, okay, ceteris paribus, or, the big point here is, considering all else is constant, the only reason I can shift along the amount demanded is if the price changes. Okay, very important. The only way I can change my amount demanded is the only way I can change, for example, go from Q1 to Q2 is if the price changes from P1 to P2. Okay? Does that make sense? The only reason I can change my amount demanded is if the price changes. P, price changes. Okay? Really important to understand. All right. The way you shift this entire demand graph is something I'll talk about in the next lesson, and that's a little more complicated. But understand that along this demand schedule, okay, the demand graph and the demand schedule, same thing, okay? People will be like, there's a demand schedule, same thing, it means a demand line, all right? That's just a side note. But in this demand line, or a demand schedule, or a demand graph, same thing, it talks about this line right here. The only way we can change the amount demanded is if we change the price point, okay? The way we change the demand graph is something different, and there are a lot of other conditions that I have to talk about. But holding all else constant, ceteris paribus, okay? That's what it means. Holding all else constant is ceteris paribus. We're going to make sure that it's only the price that changes the amount demanded. All right? If that's good for everybody. So the way we change demand, I'll talk about it in the next particular class. But before all that happens, I'm going to do a quick recap of what I've gone over for today. And I'm going to keep this graph intact because it's pretty important. Okay? This is the price, and this is the quantity, demand, and this is the supply. Always label your graphs. If I have not labeled my graphs, I'm sorry. Always label your graphs because it's really important for the grader to see what you're writing about. So going over the recap, we started off with the basic supply and demand. We talked about markets, right? The market that we've been talking about for the past 30 minutes or so is about the competitive market, right? And in a competitive market, firms are, you guys should know this by now, price takers, perfect. What does that mean? Price takers is that firms don't dictate their own price, rather it's the equilibrium, right? The equilibrium is this point where the amount demanded equals amount supplied. I hope you guys remember that. This is the equilibrium point, okay? This is where how the prices are set in a particular competitive market. One firm cannot set the price, rather it is the equilibrium of all these firms together that sets the equilibrium price. In the long run, in a competitive market, there's no surplus or shortage. Why? Because consumers and how the equilibrium dictates is what comes down to the price. If the price is higher than the equilibrium price, prices come down. Price is lower than the equilibrium price, price is going to go up. Okay, and the reasons I have gone over, and hopefully you guys know the reasons. All right. Amount demanded is the amount that the consumers are willing to buy at a particular price point. At Q1, people are willing to buy Q1. At price 2, people are willing to buy Q2. The only way amount demanded changes is if the price changes, okay? Considering all else is constant, okay? Really important to understand all that. Absolute price talks about the price that's stated. Relative price compares the prices of one firm to the prices set by other firms, okay? Typically in a competitive market, there's one equilibrium price and one equilibrium quantity, okay? There might be different points temporarily, but they're always going to come back to that equilibrium point, right? Equilibrium, amount demanded, right? Amount supplied. This is equilibrium right here, okay? And the way we set up equilibrium was, go over here, PE, price of equilibrium, go down, QE, which is right here, right? In the middle is the quantity equilibrium, okay? I hope all of you got that. My question today is going to be pretty simple and straightforward. And the question is the following. What is the amount demanded? Give me the definition of amount demanded, okay? And how is that different from demand? Now, if you don't get the later part, that's okay. Just make sure you give me the definition for the amount demanded, all right? Apart from that, the second part of this question is going to be, draw me a graph showing the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. First question, what is amount demanded? Second part of the question, draw me a graph showing the equilibrium of price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. Everyone got that? And for the next class, I'll give you the answer and show you the graph and hopefully make you experts in the basic equilibrium graph. I look forward to meeting you guys in the next lesson. And for now, this is the end of lesson 5. Thank you so much.